The city was alive with its usual chaos. Horns blaring, pedestrians hustling across streets, and the distant hum of conversations blending into the urban symphony. Inside a beat-up yellow cab, the tension was just beginning to simmer. James, a seasoned cab driver known for his unfiltered opinions, gripped the steering wheel as he navigated through the morning traffic. His passenger, a man in a plain suit and a quiet demeanor, sat silently in the back, listening intently. "I'll tell you what's wrong with this city," James began, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's those rich guys sitting in their fancy offices, sipping on lattes, thinking they're better than the rest of us. They've got no idea what it's like to hustle every day, just to make ends meet." The passenger's expression remained calm, his gaze fixed on the world rushing by outside. He adjusted his tie and leaned back, letting James continue his rant. What James didn't know was that this unassuming man in the back seat was none other than David Sterling, the millionaire CEO of the very cab company James worked for. As the ride continued, the conversation would take a turn that neither man could have anticipated, leading to a moment of truth that would change James's life forever. The city streets were alive with their usual cacophony, a blend of honking horns, street vendors calling out their wares, and the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on the sidewalks. It was a weekday morning, and the city pulsed with energy as people rushed to work, meetings, or their favorite coffee shops. Amidst the chaos, yellow cabs weaved through the gridlock traffic, their drivers navigating the maze with practiced precision. One such cab belonged to James Cooper, a middle-aged driver who had been in the business for over 2 decades. With a thick Brooklyn accent and a personality as vibrant as the city itself, James was never one to shy away from voicing his opinions. His cab was his stage and his passengers were his audience, whether they wanted to be or not. His dashboard bore the marks of years of service, cracked vinyl, faded stickers, and a small photo of his family clipped to the visor. James prided himself on being a man of the people, unafraid to speak his mind about the injustices he saw in the world, especially when it came to the divide between the wealthy and the working class. His passenger that day was David Sterling, an unassuming man in his early 40s. Dressed in a plain navy suit with a modest tie, David could easily blend into any crowd. But behind his calm demeanor lay a sharp mind and a formidable reputation as the CEO of one of the city's largest transportation companies. Despite his wealth and influence, David was known for his low-profile lifestyle and his belief in understanding his business from the ground up. That morning, he had chosen to forego his private car service and take one of his company's cabs instead, curious to experience the daily grind of his employees firsthand. The cab, with its slightly worn interior and faint smell of coffee, was a stark contrast to the luxury David was accustomed to. Yet he sat quietly in the back seat, observing the city through the window as James's steady stream of commentary filled the air. The two men, seemingly worlds apart, were about to share a ride that would bring their lives and perspectives crashing together in ways neither could have anticipated. As the cab jerked forward through the gridlock, James adjusted the rearview mirror, stealing a glance at his quiet passenger. David sat with his hands neatly folded, his expression unreadable as he gazed out the window. To James, the man in the suit looked like just another corporate type, someone who'd never experienced a day of struggle. James cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "So what's the story with you? You one of those suit and tie guys who spends all day in an office pushing papers?" he asked, his tone laced with a hint of disdain. David glanced up briefly, offering a faint smile. "Something like that," he replied, his tone nonchalant. James chuckled, shaking his head. "Figures. You know, people like you don't get it. You sit in your air-conditioned offices, looking down on folks like me. Meanwhile, we're out here busting our butts, dodging traffic, dealing with rude passengers, and praying we make enough to cover rent. Tell me, when's the last time you even set foot on a crowded street?" "Huh." David raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting James continue his rant. The driver's words were sharp, but his frustration was genuine. He wasn't angry at David specifically. He was venting years of pent-up frustration at a system he believed was rigged against people like him. The cab hit a red light, and James took the opportunity to gesture toward a billboard overhead. It featured an advertisement for the very cab company he worked for, boasting about its commitment to supporting hardworking drivers. James scoffed. See that? A load of PR nonsense. The bosses upstairs have no idea what it's really like for us. They say they care, but they just want us to keep grinding while they rake in the cash. David adjusted his tie, choosing his words carefully. And you think none of them care? He asked, his tone measured. James snorted. Care? Nah. They care about one thing, profits. People like me? We're just cogs in their big machine. The conversation was interrupted by a call on James's dispatch radio. A voice crackled through, instructing him to pick up a VIP client in Midtown after his current fare. James rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. Another big shot who thinks the world revolves around them. David's lips quirked in a subtle smile, but he stayed silent. The cab continued to inch through traffic, the tension between the two men growing with every exchange. Meanwhile, in the office of Sterling Transit, Sarah, David's executive assistant, monitored the progress of her boss's impromptu field visit. She had been skeptical of his decision to ride anonymously in one of their cabs, fearing it might lead to unnecessary complications. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. On track. Observing a passionate driver. We'll check in after. Sarah sighed, imagining the kinds of passion he was witnessing. Back in the cab, James turned his attention to the city around them. He pointed to a group of construction workers taking a quick coffee break on the sidewalk. See those guys? That's real work. Those are the people who keep this city running. Not the suits. David finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. Do you think people in suits don't work hard? James scoffed again. Hard? Maybe if you call golfing on weekends and giving orders hard work. Come on, man, it's not the same. The cab came to another stop, and James's phone buzzed with a notification about the company's new driver incentives. He rolled his eyes, showing the screen to David. See this? They send us these messages about bonuses and support. It's all a joke. A couple of bucks here and there while they line their pockets. David leaned back, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. He had implemented that very program, believing it would genuinely help his drivers. Hearing James's perspective was sobering, revealing gaps he hadn't considered in the system he thought was fair. As they neared their destination, the tension in the cab had reached a boiling point. James continued his rant, unaware that the man in the back seat was listening not just as a passenger but as someone who could change everything. David remained calm, his quiet demeanor masking the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. The ride wasn't over yet, but both men were about to face truths they hadn't anticipated. As the cab pulled up to an upscale office building in Midtown, James let out a low whistle. Well, here you are, he said, glancing in the rearview mirror at David. Figures you'd be heading to one of these places. Bet you've got some big meeting about squeezing a few more bucks out of us little guys. David, calm as ever, stepped out of the cab without a word, smoothing his jacket. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. How much do I owe you? He asked, his tone polite. James shrugged. $15, give or take. But hey, for a guy like you, that's pocket change, right? David handed over a 20, pausing for a moment as James rifled through his small stash of bills for change. Then, with deliberate calm, David said, keep the change. And by the way, I'll see you inside. James blinked, momentarily confused. Inside? What are you talking about? David smiled faintly, offering no explanation. Instead, he strode confidently into the building, disappearing through the gleaming glass doors. James frowned, the interaction leaving him unsettled. His radio crackled again, reminding him of the VIP client he was scheduled to pick up at this very location. He sighed, parking the cab and heading toward the lobby to meet his next passenger. As James stepped into the grand entrance, his eyes widened. The lobby was an expanse of marble floors, towering glass walls, and sleek modern furnishings. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the city streets he had just left behind. A receptionist greeted him, gesturing toward a private elevator. Mr. Sterling is expecting you, she said with a professional smile. James's confusion deepened. Sterling, he muttered, stepping into the elevator as instructed. The name rang a bell, Sterling Transit, his employer's parent company. The elevator doors opened to a sprawling office with panoramic views of the city. Standing at the head of a long, polished table was none other than David, now exuding the quiet authority of someone in charge. The plain suit suddenly seemed more fitting, his calm demeanor taking on an entirely new meaning. James, David said, his voice steady. I believe we were just talking about the challenges faced by drivers like yourself. James froze, his mind racing to connect the dots. Wait. He stopped mid-sentence, the realization hitting him like a freight train. You're my boss. David nodded, gesturing for James to take a seat. Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. James sat down hesitantly, his earlier bravado now replaced with a mix of embarrassment and awe. David's gaze softened, but his tone remained firm. You're passionate, James. I respect that. But there's a lot about this business and the people running it that you don't know. Let's talk about how we can make things better. For everyone. The moment hung heavy in the air as James realized this was more than a reprimand. It was an opportunity for change. The tension in the room began to ease as David leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. James, he started, his voice calm but resolute. I didn't come here today to reprimand you. I came to listen, to understand what it's like for the people who make this company run. And I'll admit, some of what you said hit home. James shifted in his chair, still reeling from the realization that the man he'd been ranting to all morning was the head of the company. Look, I didn't mean to disrespect you or anything, James stammered. It's tough out there, you know? We're hustling to get by, and sometimes it feels like nobody cares. David nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's exactly why I needed to hear it. It's easy to sit in an office and make decisions without fully understanding their impact on people like you. But that stops today. James raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. What do you mean? David leaned back, his tone becoming more conversational. Your honesty made me realize there's a disconnect between what we think we're doing to support our drivers and what's actually happening. Starting next week, we're launching an initiative to address those gaps. Better incentives, improved communication, and direct input from drivers like you. James blinked, surprised. You're serious? You're actually going to listen to us? Absolutely, David replied firmly. But I'll need people on the ground to help me understand what's working and what's not. People like you. James sat back, processing the unexpected offer. So you want me to, what? Be your spy? David chuckled. Not exactly. I want you to be a liaison between the drivers and management. Share your experiences, bring feedback, and help us bridge the gap. You've got the passion, James. Let's turn it into something constructive. James hesitated, his skepticism warring with a glimmer of hope. All right, he said finally, a small smile creeping onto his face. I'm in. But if I see something I don't like, you'll hear about it. I wouldn't have it any other way, David said, extending a hand. As they shook hands, the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to optimistic. For James, it was a chance to make a difference. For David, it was an opportunity to rebuild trust. Together, they set the stage for a partnership that would not only improve the company but also redefine what it meant to truly listen to the people who keep it running. The story of James and David is a powerful reminder that the most valuable insights often come from those working on the front lines. What began as a cab ride filled with frustration and misunderstanding turned into an opportunity for connection, growth, and change. James's raw honesty, born from years of feeling overlooked, highlighted the challenges faced by workers who form the backbone of any business. Meanwhile, David's willingness to listen, despite the harsh critique, showed the importance of humility and open-minded leadership. For James, the experience was transformative. He learned that while frustrations are valid, they can lead to meaningful change when channeled constructively. His journey from a disgruntled employee to an empowered liaison demonstrated the value of speaking up and working towards solutions. David's transformation was equally significant. As a CEO, he realized the need to step out of his office and engage directly with his employees to understand their realities. His decision to involve James in shaping future policies underscored his commitment to creating a more equitable and supportive workplace. The moral of the story is clear. Communication and mutual respect bridge divides. True leadership isn't about maintaining power from above. It's about building trust by listening to and valuing every voice, no matter how small. This tale challenges us to look beyond titles and appearances, reminding us that change begins when we're willing to listen, learn, and collaborate. Together, even the widest gaps can be bridged, one conversation at a time. As James and David's story shows, sometimes the most unexpected conversations lead to the biggest changes. It's a powerful reminder that every voice matters and that even those at the top need to listen to the people who keep everything running smoothly. But it also leaves us with a question. How often do we really take the time to understand someone else's perspective? How many opportunities for growth do we miss because we're too quick to judge or dismiss? Think about your own life. Have you ever been in James's shoes, feeling unheard or undervalued? Or perhaps you've been in David's position, needing a wake-up call to truly connect with the people around you. What did you learn from those moments? And how did they shape who you are today? Let us know in the comments if you've experienced a moment where listening, or being listened to, changed everything. Your story could inspire others and spark a meaningful conversation. If the story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And stay tuned for our next video, where we'll dive into another incredible tale of transformation, redemption, and unexpected connections. After all, every story has the power to change lives, sometimes even your own. What will your next story be?